They stole my backyard for a community project. Now their HOA president is out of a job. The HOA destroyed my garden, tore down my shed, and installed solar panels without my permission. So I took them to court, exposed their backdoor deals, made them pay for every dollar of damage, and got their president kicked out. Now, my backyard is restored, the HOA is reformed, and they'll never steal from another homeowner again. Ethan Carter exhaled as he turned onto his quiet suburban street, the familiar sight of his home coming into view. It had been a brutal week of back-to-back meetings, late-night negotiations, and airport layovers, and all he wanted was a few days of peace before doing it all over again. His modest yet charming house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, a personal retreat from the chaos of work. The perfectly maintained backyard, blooming with rose bushes and shaded by a towering oak, had always been a sanctuary. He had spent years cultivating it, carefully choosing every flower, every patch of grass, every stone on the small patio. But as he pulled into the driveway, something felt off. At first, he chalked it up to exhaustion. Maybe the sunlight was playing tricks on him. But no, there it was again, a bright glare flashing from his backyard. It was too strong, too unnatural. His heart rate picked up as he sat in the car, staring at the distorted reflection bouncing off something large and metallic behind his house. Frowning, Ethan killed the engine, grabbed his suitcase from the passenger seat, and walked up to the front door. He unlocked it with a practiced motion, pushing the door open and dropping his bag unceremoniously in the hallway. The house was quiet, just as he had left it. But that glare, it was still nagging at him. Instead of heading to the kitchen for the cold beer he'd been craving, Ethan veered toward the sliding glass doors that led to his backyard. He reached for the handle, already feeling a strange unease creeping into his chest. The moment he slid the door open and stepped outside, his breath hitched. Gone. It was all gone. The vibrant flower beds, the neatly trimmed hedges, the old wooden shed that held his gardening tools, all of it had disappeared. In their place stood a sea of sleek black solar panels, lined in perfect rows, their polished surfaces tilting toward the sky like silent invaders. Ethan's stomach dropped. He blinked hard, as if somehow his vision was playing tricks on him, but the panels remained, gleaming in the afternoon sun. The patio furniture had been shoved awkwardly to the side, barely clinging to the edges of what used to be a peaceful space. His rose bushes, his pride and joy were nowhere to be seen. Instead, thick metal frames and electrical wiring snaked across the yard. Even the shed had been dismantled and pushed carelessly into a corner, as if it were nothing more than an afterthought. Ethan stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the scene before him. Who the hell had done this? A deep, unsettling anger began to build in his chest, tightening his jaw, clenching his fists. He hadn't authorized this. No one had called, emailed, or even left a damn note. And yet, here he was, standing in what used to be his private retreat, now transformed into something that looked more like a corporate solar farm than a backyard. The low hum of electricity buzzed from the panels, a constant, invasive sound that made his skin crawl. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, this was a violation. Who had done this? And more importantly, why? Ethan swallowed his rage, but his pulse was hammering in his ears. Someone was going to have to answer for this. Ethan Carter paced back and forth on what little remained of his patio, his phone gripped tightly in his hand. The hum of the solar panels filled the air, an irritating reminder that his private backyard had been stolen right out from under him. His first instinct was to march down the street and start knocking on doors, demanding to know what the hell had happened. But instead, he forced himself to take a deep breath and dialed the one person who always knew what was going on in the neighborhood, Margaret Jensen. Margaret had lived next door for over 30 years, a sweet, elderly woman who kept an eye on everything. If so much as a misplaced trash bin popped up on the street, she would know about it. Ethan had always liked her. She baked too many cookies, had a soft spot for stray cats, and gossiped like a small-town radio station. If anyone could shed light on this mess, it was her. The phone rang twice before her cheerful voice answered. "Ethan, you're back. How was your trip, dear?" Ethan barely registered the greeting, his frustration boiling over. "Margaret, did you notice anything strange happening in my backyard while I was gone?" There was a slight pause before she responded, her tone casual, almost amused. "Oh, you mean the solar panels?" "Yes, quite the project they started on Tuesday. The HOA's Green Initiative, I believe. I thought you knew all about it." Ethan's stomach twisted. "I knew nothing about it." His voice was clipped, his fingers tightening around the phone. "No one called me. No one asked me for permission. They just did this." Margaret let out a small hum, like she was trying to remember something. Well, I overheard Karen from the HOA talking about it last week. She said your backyard was perfect for the project, something about optimal sunlight exposure. Karen Whitman. The name sent a fresh wave of anger through Ethan's chest. Karen had been HOA president for as long as he could remember, and if there was one thing she loved more than homeowners' fees, it was wielding power over the neighborhood. She was the type who would send a violation notice if your grass was half an inch too high, but would shrug off real concerns if they didn't fit her agenda. Margaret continued, completely unaware of Ethan's growing rage. I just assumed they had your approval. They sent out a newsletter about it last month, didn't they? Ethan's breath came sharp and short. A newsletter? His jaw tightened painfully. Since when did a newsletter count as legal permission to tear apart someone's private property? Thanks, Margaret. I'll take it from here. Without waiting for a response, he ended the call and immediately pulled up Karen Whitman's number. His thumb hovered over the dial button for half a second before he pressed it, bracing himself for whatever bullshit excuse she was about to throw his way. It rang 3 times before she answered, her voice far too chipper for his liking. Ethan, welcome back. How was your trip? Cut the small talk, Karen. His voice was sharp, his patience non-existent. What the hell is going on in my backyard? There was a pause too long, too calculated. When she finally spoke, her tone had shifted into that familiar, practiced authority. Oh, that. It's part of the HOA's new sustainability program. Didn't you see the newsletter? Ethan gritted his teeth. I don't give a damn about a newsletter, Karen. I never approved this. No one asked me. Her tone remained sickeningly calm. Well, the board unanimously agreed to designate underutilized areas for the solar project. Your backyard happened to be one of the best spots in the neighborhood. It's all for the greater good, Ethan. This will lower energy costs for everyone. Ethan scoffed, running a hand over his face in disbelief. Are you even hearing yourself? My backyard is not some underutilized community space, it's my property. You don't get to decide what happens to it. Karen sighed, now slipping into full condescension mode. Technically, under the new bylaw amendments, the HOA has the right to implement improvements that benefit the community. We're well within our rights. Ethan's blood boiled. A newsletter is not the same as asking for my permission, he snapped. You destroyed my garden, my shed, my entire backyard, without so much as a phone call. You don't get to spin this as some community service when you're the only ones who decided on it. There was another pause, the kind that told Ethan she was choosing her words carefully. Ethan, if you have concerns, you're more than welcome to bring them up at the next HOA meeting. Ethan let out a bitter laugh. Of course. The classic HOA strategy, stall, delay, and make the process of pushing back so frustrating that most people would just give up. I'll do more than bring it up, Karen. His voice was low, steady, dangerous. This isn't over. Before she could respond, he ended the call, his hands trembling with anger. This wasn't just an overstep. This was war. Ethan stormed inside, his mind racing. His gut told him there was more to this than Karen was letting on, and he needed proof. Marching straight to his home office, he yanked open the filing cabinet where he kept every HOA notice, newsletter, and bylaw update. For years, he had been wary of their tactics, keeping every document just in case. He sifted through stacks of neatly labeled folders, flipping page after page, looking for any mention of the solar project. But there was nothing, no formal notice, no signed agreement, no request for homeowner approval. His frustration deepened as he turned to his desk and fired up his laptop, navigating to the HOA's website. It was a nightmare of broken links and outdated announcements, typical of how the board operated. But Ethan was determined, clicking through each section until he found what he was looking for, meeting minutes from the last HOA board session, dated just 2 weeks ago. As he scanned the document, his chest tightened. The report outlined the board's decision to move forward with a new sustainability initiative and detailed the unanimous vote to designate certain underutilized properties within the community for solar panel installation. The language was deliberately vague, no specific addresses, no homeowner consultations, just a blanket decision made behind closed doors. Ethan's jaw clenched as he read further. The HOA had partnered with Sunglow Energy Solutions, a private company specializing in residential solar energy. The terms of the agreement were conveniently absent, but one thing was clear, the HOA was financially benefiting from the deal, while homeowners were left with the consequences. The more he read, the angrier he became. This wasn't just about sustainability, this was about profit. Karen and her board had cut a deal, using homeowners' private properties as bargaining chips. Slamming his laptop shut, Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. They knew exactly what they were doing. They had worded everything just carefully enough to avoid direct blame, assuming no one would dig into the fine print. But they had underestimated him. He wasn't going to let this slide. Ethan didn't waste any time. The next morning, he stormed into the HOA office, his anger barely contained. The small, sterile lobby smelled like cheap coffee and laminate flooring, the kind of place that tried too hard to feel official. A young receptionist sat behind the desk, typing lazily on a keyboard, barely looking up as Ethan approached. "I need to speak to Karen Whitman or someone from the board. Now." His voice was sharp, demanding. The receptionist blinked, clearly not used to people walking in like this. "I'm sorry, but Karen isn't available at the moment. Can I take a message?" Ethan let out a dry laugh. "No, I don't need a message. I need a conversation. My backyard has been turned into a damn solar farm, and I want answers." The receptionist hesitated, glancing toward a closed office door. After a moment, she picked up the phone, murmured something, and then nodded toward the hallway. "Mr. Langston can see you now." Ethan didn't bother thanking her. He strode toward the office, barely restraining himself from slamming the door open. Inside, Robert Langston, the HOA treasurer, sat behind a mahogany desk far too big for someone whose job was mostly collecting late fees. He was in his late 40s, neatly dressed, with an air of forced politeness that made Ethan want to punch something. "Ethan," Robert said smoothly, motioning to a chair. "Have a seat." "I'll stand," Ethan snapped. "You know why I'm here." Robert folded his hands on the desk, expression neutral. "I assume this is about the solar panels." "No, it's about the weather," Ethan shot back sarcastically. "Of course, it's about the panels. You turned my backyard into a construction site without my permission." Robert let out a small sigh, as if he had dealt with complaints like this a dozen times before and found them exhausting. "Ethan, I understand your frustration, but this project benefits the whole community. Give it time. You'll see it's for the best." Ethan took a step forward, planting his hands on the desk. "This is my property. I never agreed to this. I wasn't even notified. You can't just do whatever the hell you want because it's for the community." Robert smirked, leaning back in his chair, unbothered. "If you have concerns, you can bring them up at the next HOA meeting." Ethan clenched his fists. It was a script, the same patronizing garbage Karen had fed him. They were stalling, hoping he'd get tired and give up like everyone else. He let out a slow breath, forcing himself to stay in control. "Oh, I'll bring it up," he said, his voice steady but dangerous. "But you better believe this isn't ending in some HOA meeting." Robert's smirk faltered for half a second, but Ethan didn't give him the satisfaction of lingering. Without another word, he turned and walked out, more furious than ever. Ethan wasn't about to waste any more time arguing with people who thought they could bulldoze his rights. He needed someone who could fight back, someone who knew the law better than the HOA did. The next morning, he sat in a sleek downtown office, across from Jessica Monroe, a real estate attorney with a reputation for tearing corrupt homeowner associations to shreds. She was in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed and direct, the kind of person who could see through bullshit in less than 5 seconds. Jessica listened carefully as Ethan laid everything out: the unauthorized solar panels, the lack of notice, the HOA's smug dismissal of his complaints. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair, flipping through the documents he had brought. Her expression shifted from mild curiosity to something colder, more calculated. "This is bad," she said finally, setting the papers down. "Bad for them, not for you." Ethan raised an eyebrow. Meaning? They're in trouble," Jessica replied. "What they've done isn't just an overreach, it's illegal. I see at least 3 major violations here: unauthorized use of private property, destruction of personal assets, and trespassing without consent. Even if they claim their bylaws allow for community projects, they cannot override your property rights without direct, written permission. And let me guess, no one ever asked for your signature?" "Not even a phone call," Ethan confirmed. Jessica's mouth twitched in a smirk. "That's what I thought. HOA boards love to assume people won't fight back, but they just picked the wrong homeowner." She pulled out a legal pad and started outlining their next move. "First, we're sending them a cease and desist letter today. It'll demand the immediate removal of the solar panels and compensation for damages. If they refuse, we escalate straight to a lawsuit. Second, we start gathering evidence. Photos, records, HOA meeting minutes, everything that proves they acted without authority. If this goes to court, we want an airtight case." Ethan nodded, feeling a new sense of control for the first time since he got home. "How long do you think it'll take for them to cave?" Jessica smirked, tapping her pen against the desk. "Depends. If they're smart, they'll comply immediately. But if they try to push back, we'll make sure they regret it. That same afternoon, Jessica drafted and delivered the cease and desist letter to the HOA office. Ethan felt a small surge of satisfaction imagining Karen's reaction when she read it. But his moment of victory was short-lived because the very next day, a letter appeared in his mailbox. A $500 fine. The HOA claimed Ethan was interfering with a community improvement project and was now in violation of HOA regulations. Ethan stared at the letter, his jaw tightening. They were trying to intimidate him, trying to make him back down. But all they did was prove Jessica right. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. This was war. Ethan had expected pushback, but the sheer audacity of the HOA ignoring a formal legal demand still made his blood boil. The cease and desist letter had been delivered in person, stamped, signed, and impossible to ignore, yet Karen and her board had chosen silence over compliance. They weren't backing down. Fortunately, neither was Jessica. The fact that they haven't responded tells us one thing, she said, tapping her nails against her desk. They think they can get away with it. So, we take it to court. Within days, Jessica officially filed a lawsuit against the HOA, listing multiple violations, including trespassing, destruction of personal property, and unauthorized modifications to private land. Ethan was ready to fight, but he had no idea just how deep the HOA's corruption went until legal discovery began. Jessica submitted requests for all relevant documents, meeting minutes, financial records, and most importantly, internal emails. The HOA was legally required to hand them over, and when the files finally came in, what they revealed was far worse than Ethan had imagined. One email, dated a month before the solar panels were installed, was from Karen Whitman to Sunglow Energy Solutions. The subject line read, "Solar Expansion Plan. Fast Track." The body of the email made Ethan's stomach turn. Karen, if we ask for permission, he might say no. It's better to act now and deal with objections later. Ethan stared at the words, his rage simmering to a boil. They had known. They had deliberately skipped over asking him because they feared his answer. They had chosen deception over due process, and now they were trying to cover their tracks. Another email between Karen and Robert Langston discussed the financial incentive Sunglow had promised the HOA in return for allowing the solar panels. Robert, the deal with Sunglow is solid. HOA gets a percentage of the tax credits and long-term energy savings. We just need to manage any unhappy homeowners carefully. Karen, understood. If anyone complains, we'll frame it as a community project. They won't have much legal ground to stand on. Ethan slammed his fist against the desk. They knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't just acting under shady HOA policies. This was intentional deception, financial corruption, and property theft disguised as sustainability. Jessica, reviewing the emails beside him, gave a rare, satisfied smirk. This, she said, tapping the screen, is what we call a smoking gun. Ethan wasn't just angry anymore. He was ready to bury them. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread quickly through the neighborhood that Ethan Carter was taking on the HOA, and many homeowners had shown up to watch. Some were there to support him, others to see if the HOA could actually be held accountable. But for Ethan, there was only one goal today: to win. Jessica sat beside him, flipping through her notes with the calm confidence of someone who had already won before the trial even began. Across the aisle, Karen Whitman and Robert Langston sat stiffly with their lawyer, an older man with a permanent frown. Karen avoided Ethan's gaze, but he wasn't interested in pleasantries. She had spent months ignoring his concerns, dismissing his complaints, and now she was about to answer for it. The judge entered, and proceedings began. Jessica wasted no time. "Your Honor," she began, standing with the kind of controlled energy that made everyone in the room pay attention. "This case is simple. The HOA, under the direction of Karen Whitman and her board, knowingly violated my client's property rights. Without his consent, they demolished his garden, removed his shed, and installed an industrial solar panel system. We will prove not only that this was done without legal authorization, but that the HOA acted deliberately, choosing deception over due process." She turned toward the jury and spectators, pacing slowly. "Today, we will show evidence of internal HOA emails admitting that they skipped proper approvals because they feared my client would say no. We will present financial records indicating that the HOA and Sunglow Energy Solutions entered into an agreement for financial gain, all while forcing private homeowners to bear the consequences. We will also hear testimony from a representative of Sunglow Energy, who will confirm that the HOA misled them into believing they had all necessary permissions. Jessica stopped, turning to face the judge. And finally, we will show that when my client objected, the HOA attempted to intimidate him with baseless fines and legal red tape, rather than addressing the clear violation of his rights. With that, the battle officially began. The HOA's lawyer tried to spin the case, claiming that the solar panels were for the benefit of the entire community and that Ethan was prioritizing his personal interests over environmental progress. But when Jessica began presenting the evidence, the entire courtroom shifted. First, she displayed the before and after photos of Ethan's backyard, his thriving garden, his patio, his shed, all replaced by the cold, industrial rows of solar panels. Then, she revealed the internal emails. The moment the judge read Karen's words aloud, if we ask for permission, he might say no. It's better to act now and deal with objections later. A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her attorney leaning over to whisper in her ear. They knew this was bad. When it was time for Karen to take the stand, Jessica approached the podium with a sharp, almost predatory energy. "Ms. Whitman," Jessica said smoothly, "did you personally inform Mr. Carter that his property had been selected for this project?" Karen cleared her throat, shifting in her seat. "We sent a newsletter to all homeowners." Jessica cut her off. "That's not what I asked. Did you personally inform him?" Karen hesitated. "No." Jessica nodded, flipping through her papers. "You stated in HOA records that the solar panel project was approved unanimously by the board. Were homeowners invited to vote on the decision?" Karen glanced at her lawyer, who gave a subtle nod. "The board has the authority to make decisions in the best interest of the community." "So, that's a no?" Karen's lips tightened. "No." Jessica didn't stop. She held up the printed emails, highlighting Karen's exact words about avoiding Ethan's approval. "Ms. Whitman, would you care to explain this email? The one where you explicitly state that you chose not to ask Mr. Carter for permission because he might say no." Karen froze. For the first time, she looked genuinely nervous. She glanced at the judge, the jury, even her own attorney, as if searching for a way out. That email was taken out of context, she tried to argue. Jessica raised an eyebrow. "Out of context?" "Ms. Whitman, the context is crystal clear. You knew this was wrong, and you did it anyway." Karen had nothing. She stammered, tried to dodge, but every answer only made her look worse. By the time Jessica was finished, Karen looked like a cornered animal. After hearing all the evidence, the judge didn't need much time. His ruling was swift and decisive. The Homeowners Association acted outside its authority. Mr. Carter's rights as a private property owner were violated. Effective immediately, the HOA is ordered to remove all solar panels from his property at their own expense. Furthermore, Mr. Carter is to be compensated for damages, including landscaping restoration and property repairs. The HOA will also cover his legal fees in full. The courtroom erupted in hushed conversations. Ethan exhaled slowly, a mix of relief and exhaustion washing over him. It was over. Karen sat stone-faced, staring down at the table. She had lost. The HOA's lawyer was already muttering something about appealing, but Jessica leaned over to whisper to Ethan, "They won't. They don't have a case left to stand on." As Ethan walked out of the courthouse, he felt lighter than he had in weeks. The battle was won, but the war? Not quite over yet. Even after the court ruling, the HOA didn't make things easy. The removal of the solar panels was supposed to happen immediately, but of course, Karen and her board played their usual games, dragging their feet with excuses about logistical delays and coordinating with Sunglow for proper deconstruction. Ethan expected as much, which was why he documented every single day that passed, taking photos, videos, and keeping a running record of the delay. He wasn't about to let them pull another stunt. After nearly 2 weeks of stalling, Sunglow finally sent a crew to dismantle the panels. Ethan made sure to be home for every second of it, standing in his backyard with his arms crossed as the workers moved piece by piece of the mess the HOA had created. The workers didn't say much, but Ethan caught snippets of their conversations, muttered complaints about how this project had turned into a PR nightmare for their company. One younger guy, clearly frustrated, told another worker, "This whole thing was rushed. HOA told us they had permission. We wouldn't have touched it if we knew they didn't." Ethan bit back a response. He had no sympathy for Sunglow. They should have done their due diligence before tearing apart private property, but at least now, it was clear that Karen had lied to them too. Once the panels were finally gone, Ethan surveyed the full extent of the destruction, and it was worse than he had feared. The grass was completely destroyed, the soil compacted from the weight of the panels. His flower beds? Gone. The area where his rose bushes once stood was now just a patch of barren dirt. Deep trenches ran across the yard where wiring had been buried. His shed, shoved into a corner, had been dented and damaged beyond use. The patio? Scratched, stained, looking like a construction zone instead of a place to relax. It was like someone had bulldozed his sanctuary and left behind a lifeless wasteland. Meanwhile, the fallout from the lawsuit was spreading through the neighborhood. Homeowners who had originally ignored the situation now started asking questions. The emails revealed in court, especially the one where Karen openly admitted to avoiding homeowner permission, had pissed off a lot of people. Even residents who had supported the solar initiative were furious that the HOA had made financial deals behind their backs. Nobody liked feeling like they had been used, and that's exactly what had happened. A petition began circulating calling for Karen's removal from the board. At first, it was just a handful of people, the usual crowd who had never liked her micromanaging style. But as more details emerged, signatures piled up fast. The HOA's credibility was in shambles, and the residents wanted blood. Ethan didn't need to lift a finger, Karen had dug her own grave, and now the neighborhood was more than happy to push her into it. The HOA had no choice but to pay up. Between the court order and the growing resentment from the neighborhood, they wired the compensation money within days, probably hoping to make the problem disappear as quickly as possible. Ethan didn't care about their motives. All that mattered was finally getting his backyard back. With the funds in hand, he wasted no time hiring landscapers and contractors. The first step was fixing the ground itself. They had to regrade the yard, lay down fresh, nutrient-rich soil, and plant new grass to replace the dead patches left behind by the solar panels. It took time, but little by little, the vibrant green started returning, pushing out the cold, gray memory of what had been done. Next came the rose bushes. Ethan picked out every single plant himself, making sure to bring back the deep reds, soft pinks, and brilliant whites that had once lined the edges of his yard. He had spent years growing them before, and while he couldn't replace time, he could at least restore what had been stolen. His shed was rebuilt from scratch, a better, sturdier version than before. The contractors reinforced it, added new shelving, and made sure it was exactly how Ethan wanted it. No more cram tools, no more shaky foundation. This was a fresh start. For the patio, Ethan decided to go even further. Instead of just restoring it, he upgraded. He had always wanted a pergola, something that would offer shade, a cozy place to sit, and a touch of elegance. Now, with the opportunity in front of him, he finally went for it. The new pergola stretched over his seating area, with hanging lights and climbing vines already beginning to take root along the wooden beams. And for the first time in months, Ethan finally felt at peace. The endless battle, the stress, the anger, it was all behind him now. His backyard, his sanctuary, was his again. As he stood there, watching the sunlight filter through the pergola, he knew one thing for sure. He had one. ####Chapter 10, a new beginning and lessons learned. The HOA elections came faster than expected, and by the time they did, Karen didn't stand a chance. The petition for her removal had gained overwhelming support, and residents who once turned a blind eye to HOA decisions were now paying attention. At the meeting, she tried to defend herself, claiming that everything she did was for the good of the community, but nobody was buying it. The moment the ballots were counted, it was official, ***, Karen was out. ***. The new HOA board wasted no time in cleaning up the mess she left behind. One of their first actions was rewriting the bylaws, closing every loophole that allowed the board to make unilateral decisions about private property. From now on, any major modification to a homeowner's land required direct, signed approval. No more vague newsletters, no more shady deals hidden in the fine print. Ethan watched it all unfold with a strange sense of detachment. He never wanted a fight, never planned on being the guy who took down the HOA president. He had always followed the rules, paid his dues, and stayed out of the usual neighborhood drama. But when his rights were trampled, he stood his ground, and in the end, it forced real change. One morning, weeks after the dust had settled, Ethan sat on his restored patio, a fresh cup of coffee in hand. The morning sun filtered through the pergola, casting soft shadows across the wooden beams. His backyard, once a battlefield, was now a place of peace again. The grass was lush, the rose bushes were beginning to bloom, and the air was filled with the quiet hum of nature instead of buzzing electricity. He took a deep breath, letting it all sink in. This wasn't just about winning a lawsuit or fixing his yard. It was about standing up for what was his. And as he sat there, enjoying the morning stillness, he knew one thing for sure. No one would ever take his home from him again.